Hello everyone. We're almost ready to begin building our live chat room feature. Now, a live chat room relies on something in Laravel called broadcasting, right? When one user sends a message, you're broadcasting that message back out to all of the connected users in the chat room. However, before we can get onto that topic of broadcasting, we first, in this lesson, need to cover events and listeners. So let's jump into the action and let me explain. So the question is, what in the world is an event? Well, I want you to think of a web browser. When you're programming for a web browser, you can say that something should happen when a certain event occurs, like when a user scrolls down to a certain length, or when they hover over a button, or when they push a certain key on their keyboard. But the idea is that you can register these events, and then anytime that event happens, you can say what should happen in response. Well, believe it or not, we can actually do that same sort of thing in Laravel. You and I can make up an event. We can invent an event, and then anywhere in the app that we want to fire it or say that, okay, the event just took place, we can set up something that listens for that event happening, and then we can run that code whenever the event happens. So it's a great way of decoupling your code, right? You have one little bit of code that just says, hey, this event happened, but the event in and of itself doesn't do anything. It's just like an alert saying, hey, this event occurred. I hope someone's listening for this event, and whoever's listening can actually maybe go make something happen. But I'm just the event. I'm just sort of announcing it to the world. Hey, this just happened. So here's what we're going to do in this lesson as an example. Imagine anytime a user either logs in or logs out, we want to say, hey, that is considered our example event. I mean, you could name it anything, but I'm just going to name it example event. So it can occur anywhere in your application, right? So when you sign out, we could fire the event that says, hey, our event just happened. And then if you log back in, we will also run our example event. Now, the idea is that we can set up something called a listener that's listening for that specific event. Now, just to be clear, an event has nothing to do with logging in or logging out. The idea is you could literally fire or call your event when you create a new blog post, or when you perform a search, or when you visit your profile. Like, the actual event in question is irrelevant. That doesn't matter. You could set up anything you wanted. The idea is that you and I are just inventing an event of some sort. What's nice is that the event doesn't have to say what should happen in response. Also, you can have multiple listeners for just one event. But anyways, in our example, when you log out or log in, let's just log a little bit of text to our debugging file just so we can practice. So that would actually go in our listener. If this doesn't make sense yet, that's okay. I don't expect it to make perfect sense. I think we need to actually go get our hands dirty, and then it will begin to make sense. So right now, I want you to do this with me. In your text editor, look in the app folder, and then I want you to look for the providers folder. And then in that folder, you'll see that there's a file called Event Service Provider. So jump into Event Service Provider. And let's scroll down just a little bit. You'll see around line 17, there's a protected variable named listen. Here's what I want you to do. Inside this array, so right above this line that says registered, let's make up an example event. So I'm just going to say our example event, : class, and then the associative array symbol equals greater than an array. And be sure to have a comma at the end of that. But the idea is that one event can have multiple listeners listening for it to occur. In our case, we just need one. So in this array, we would just have one listener. So let's name it our example listener : class. Now, what in the world is going on? Well, in Laravel, it's typical to have an event live in its own file and also to have a listener live in its own separate file. So here's what we're going to do. If we scroll up to the top of this file and import the namespace for the files that we want to set up, there's then a command line argument where Laravel can go create those files for us. Don't worry if that didn't make sense yet, but do this with me. So up at the top here, I'm going to say use uppercase app, and then not a / but a / events, / and we named ours our example event, semicolon. Right below that, let's say use app backslash listeners backslash our example listener, semicolon. Now here's the cool part. You can go ahead and save this file. And now with these use lines in place, now all we need to do is go to our command line and we can run a command and Laravel will create the perfect files for our event and listener. So in the command line, just say PHP artisan event : generate, just like this. Let's go ahead and press enter. Laravel will look in this file that we're in and see that, hey, we haven't actually created files for these events and listeners yet. And now check this out. In our app events folder, we have this brand new file, our example event, and better yet, in the app listeners folder, we have our example listener. Now, let me explain what in the world is the point of these files. The idea is that now anywhere in our application, we can claim or we can say that this example event just occurred. So for example, let's go find our user controller, right? So that whenever you log in or log out, we're saying that the event just occurred. So I would just go into our app HTTP controllers folder, our user controller.php. Let's start with the login function. So for me, it's around line 81, right? Our public function named login. But essentially on this line where we say, success, you have successfully logged in, just right before that line, let's call event parentheses, semicolon. In these parentheses, we're going to say new, and then we named it our example event. So we're just saying like, hey, this event just occurred. This is an event that you and I invented. We made this up, but now we're saying, hey, in this exact moment, this millisecond, right after you just logged in, we're saying that, hey, the event is firing, it's happening. Now, we do need to right click on our example event and choose import class. Cool, and that will add the appropriate line up at the top, right? Our example event. So we can go ahead and actually, before we save it, let's add that same code to the logout function. So here, public function logout, just right here, I would say, call the event function, and then inside there, say new instance of our example event. Go ahead and save that. Okay, now here's the cool part. Our event doesn't need to say what should happen in response to the event occurring. The event is just like the loudspeaker. It's saying, hey, this happened, but now it's the job of the listener to be listening and actually do something useful. So check this out. We can just go into in the listeners folder in app, go into app listeners, our example listener. And if we scroll down to the bottom of this file, we're looking for the public function named handle. Inside that function, instead of these two, the comment, we can do something. Let's just log a message to the Laravel console. So I would just say uppercase log, : and we can use the method called debug. And let's just have a little bit of text that says our custom event and listener just worked. Let's go ahead and save this file. And now, just to make it abundantly clear that this actually worked, and to be clear, you would need to import log. So if you right click on log, choose import class. Cool, go ahead and hit save. Now let me show you where your log file lives. In the left-hand side of VS Code, in storage, and then in logs, there's this file named laravel.log. I'm actually going to go into that file, select everything, and just delete every single thing in the file so that it will be painfully obvious when we add something new to the file right now. But anyways, check this out. In our application, let's go ahead and log in. So that should fire the event, right? If we go back and check our log file, awesome. Our custom event and listener just worked. And if I log out, that should fire the event again. And there you can see our listener worked again. Now what's really cool is that you can have multiple listeners for each event. Like if you go back into our event service provider, we listed our event and then we gave it an array. Well, in this array, you can have more than one listener. So the idea is you're decoupling your code from the event that's taking place and what should actually happen in response. Now, really quick, before we bring this lesson to a close, I want to give you an example of how you can actually pass data into and out of the event. Let me give you an example. If we go back into our log file, Imagine if we wanted our log file to say, the user barks a lot just performed the action of log in, or like the user Brad just performed the action of log out. So here's how you could do that. Let's start in our user controller. So when you log out, right, we're saying event, calling a new instance of our example event. In these parentheses, you can just give it data. So in the parentheses, I would just give it an array, and let's give it one property. I'm just making this up. This could literally be pizza or unicorn, but let's say, username, and set that to equal. And then I would just call auth, look inside that, call user, call user, look inside that for username, comma, and I would give it another property named action. I'm just making this up, but then that could be like log out, right? The user just logged out. Because remember, we're also calling this same event when you log in. Cool, and then just to save some typing, I would copy that line into my clipboard and go find my login function. Here it is, and then I would just replace this where we're calling a new event, just paste that in, but change the name of the action to login. Cool. Let's go ahead and save that. And now we need to go receive these incoming values in our event. So go into your our example event file, and here's the function we're looking for, the construct function. So in the parentheses for underscore construct, we just need to invent a parameter. Let's call it like $, the event. And now the idea is that we can store values from the incoming data. We can store that in this object. So instead of this comment here, I would say $this. Let's have a property on the class. I'll just name it username equals, the event, look inside it for username. I would do the same thing for action, right? So $this, let's create a property named action equals, just look inside the event for action, semicolon. You can go ahead and save this file. That's all we need. So now when this new object based on our class gets constructed, we're going to be saving these properties onto the object. And now you can go into your listener, and down here on our function that's named handle, we have this incoming parameter, right? That's using type hinting. It's filling in the metaphor of what an event should be using the incoming specific data. So we can look on $event to actually get the username and the event, or the type of action. So here's what I would do. In this debug area, let's have quotes and say like the user blank, and then so this should be their actual username. So curly brackets, $event, look inside it for username. Like the user barks a lot, just performed, and then it would be like the blank action, either log in or log out. So we would just say, curly brackets, $event, look inside it for action. Let's give this a save. And now to test it out, back in your log file, you would just log in or log out. So if I log in with the Brad user, and I check my log file, awesome, the user Brad just performed login. And then if I log out with Brad, attempt to read property username on null. This has nothing to do with the concept of events in Laravel. Back in our user controller, I probably just called, the auth function a little bit too late. So if we go look for our logout function in our user controller, so obviously you would want this line to come before we actually call logout, right? So that way we actually keep track of the user before destroying their session. So just common sense, I would move that line that we wrote, put it above the auth logout line like this. And again, sorry about that. That has nothing to do with events and listeners. That's just common sense. But if we go ahead and save that, and if I go back, and if I try to log out with Brad, well, let me log in and log out again. So I can log in, I can log out, beautiful. And if you look at your log file, well, clearly we see that error message, but then if you scroll way, way down, beautiful. The user Brad just performed logged in, the user Brad just performed log out. Cool. So at this point, and hopefully it's clear that you can do much more than just log something to a file. You can do anything you want. You could create a file on the hard drive. You could delete a file. You could, as we'll learn in a few lessons, send an email in response to something. But the idea is that now that we're familiar with this concept of an event, well, Tied to an event is something called broadcasting. And broadcasting is how we're going to start building our live, let me log in really quick, our live chat room feature. Right? We're going to broadcast the message that one user sends out to all other connected users. This should be a ton of fun, so let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.